Welcome back once again to another edition of the Vipercast, and we are bringing the starts and sits for week number 10 live right now on the Vipers Network on the YouTube. So make sure you take a second, subscribe, hit the like button, and of course, if you're listening to us right now on any kind of podcasting platform, whether that be Apple or Spotify, make sure you take a second and rate and review us. You got questions? I got answers. Hit me up in the comments section here on YouTube or hit me up on Twitter at Matt Donnelly FF. Slide into those DMs if you need to. Get those questions answered. Be a little incognito from the rest of your league mates. I got you covered. Don't worry about it. Without further ado, we're going to get into these starts and sits, and we're going to start off with the quarterback position. Now, let's not get cute. If you've got Lamar Jackson, Tom Brady, Matt Stafford, Josh Allen, I guess, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, these are guys you start each and every week. So here's three more guys you need to start in week 10, starting with Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders. They are facing the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's pretty much fire up everyone and anyone against the Chiefs defense this year. Carr is third in passing yards with 2,565 yards, and he's averaging 8.9 or 8.2 yards per attempt so far, leading the league in passing of 20 yards or more. He's got 42 of those passes so far this season. So he's been airing it out a little bit more than we give him credit for, especially when we look at maybe his resume from years past. Now, the Chiefs are allowing 21.89 fantasy points per game to opposing signal callers and have surrendered the sixth most passing yards to date. Derek Carr, get him in your lineup right now. Now, another guy to get in there, Matt Ryan versus Dallas. Last week, Matt Ryan, he went off against the Saints, who had been pretty good when it comes to opposing quarterbacks so far this season for fantasy. Now, Ryan went 23 of 30 for 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, and this week he faced the Cowboys team that yields 19.58 fantasy points per game. I like Ryan. I like the way he's been spreading that ball around. No Calvin Ridley, no problem is what they're saying down south. And you know what? There's some good value to be had this week, especially in a game that I think is going to have a script that favors the Falcons and that passing game that they're going to need. Pitts is going to go Russell Gage a little bit more. I'm going to hit him a little bit later, but you're going to want to get some Falcons in your lineup this week. Now, another guy, Carson Wentz, he's heading to face the Jacksonville Jaguars. Wentz is now a top 10 option for fantasy thanks to 6 straight games with 2 or more passing touchdowns and 3 in each of the last 2 contests. Wentz has been consistent as far as production goes, scoring 17 or more fantasy points in all but 1 game this season. And now he gets the Jaguars, who are allowing 19.28 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Yeah, you can start Carson Wentz and feel comfortable doing so. Now, 2 sits for you right now. I'm sitting Kirk Cousins against the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm pretty sure I pretty much hate to love Kirk Cousins. I think that's kind of what I'm going with here. Now, the Chargers contained Jalen Hurts last week, and have been doing so all season to the quarterback position, allowing the 5th fewest points per game, averaging 15.03 per contest, while only surrendering 1,679 passing yards, which happens to be the 2nd fewest. Kirk Cousins, grab some pine. You're on the bench this week. Now, speaking of Jalen Hurts, you thought he had a tough matchup against the Chargers last week. This week, he draws the Broncos. And sure, Jalen Hurts is a QB3 right now in fantasy. But the last 2 weeks, the Eagles have put more of an emphasis on the running game. And Hurts has had his 2 worst weeks for fantasy production, failing to reach 17 points in either one of those contests. The Chargers limited Hurts to 224 total yards. That's including the 62 yards rushing he had. And the Broncos have only allowed 109 rushing yards to quarterbacks altogether this season, and are giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to the position. So Hurts, you can go sit next to Kirk Cousins this week. Now, the running back position, we know who we're starting. Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Alvin Kamara, maybe based on injury. Twitter's talking about all these guys coming in. Honestly, I think these guys are coming in. Kyrion Johnson, the Saints are bringing all these running back ins. I think that's more for Tony Jones than it is for Alvin Kamara, because he was on the field for the last play of the game there, last series. Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, Nick Chubb. Again, COVID keeps something to monitor. Deandre Johnson is definitely a good start this week as well if Chubb is going to miss some time. Austin Eckler, these are guys you start each and every week. Now, here are 3 guys I'm firing in my lineup this week. James Conner, Arizona Cardinals versus the Carolina Panthers. We have to start here. With Chase Edmonds set to miss time with that high ankle sprain, it's Conner and waiver wire wonder Eno Benjamin. Yeah, those are the guys that are running this Cardinals backfield. Even in PPR, James Conner is a surprise RB11, perhaps further cementing availability is your best ability when it comes to fantasy football. Connor has double-digit fantasy points in 5 of 7 games, including 35 last week when he found the end zone 3 times. Now, he's not going to be able to do that each and every week, but you know what? He had a season-high 21 carries. He saw a season-high 5 targets. The Panthers have been good on the season against running backs, but the last 2 weeks, they've been licking their wounds, averaging 31.4 fantasy points against. And over the last 4 weeks, that number drops a little bit down to 26 fantasy points per contest. Now, that's telling me James Conner, he's going to get some play this week. And it's going to look good for you. Now, another guy, I know people are kind of mixed right now in the fantasy community. I hear him on a lot of sits. I hear a lot of guys bench him this week. I'm going to say start Devin Singletary versus the New York Jets. Zach Moss, he made a trip to the locker room late last week there. Singletary performed well in his absence. Not only did Singletary run 35 routes in week 9, he saw 72% of the snaps. If Moss misses, Singletary has RB2 potential. In 2 earlier games this season, without Moss, Singletary had 154 yards rushing, and he scored. The Bills will be looking to take a little bit of that frustration up that Jaguars lost last week against the division rivals in New York this week. Fire up Devin Singletary. It's going to be one of those get-right games for the Buffalo Bills, I feel. Now, another guy to start, Jovante Williams versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, neither Denver or Philly is great in defending the running backs. You can literally feel comfortable starting Jordan Howard, Melvin Gordon, Jovante Williams. You can start all these guys. I'm just talking about Jovante Williams because these defenses are 3rd and 4th ranked when it comes to friendliness to the running back position. I guess that's respectively put, but while Melvin Gordon, he's going to get his touches, Jovante Williams is making most of those opportunities. Now, despite being out-touched last week, Williams posted 111 yards on the ground on 17 carries, averaging 6.5 yards per attempt. And after double-digit production in 2 of the last 3 weeks, Williams gets the Eagles defense that allows 30.58 fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. Jovante Williams must start this week. Trust me, it's going to pay off. Now, 2 running backs that I'm looking at sitting this week starts in Jacksonville. James Robinson versus the Colts. Let's be honest, this one hurts. Like next level hurts. Also, let's all be a little bit more honest. I'm probably not sitting James Robinson because that's what I do. James Robinson is like my Allen Robinson. I might have a thing for Robinsons, you know what I mean? Now, I'm going to temper my expectations when it comes to James Robinson. Now, over the last 4 weeks, the Colts are only allowing 18.68 fantasy points per game to opposing backs, which is the 4th fewest, and have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown over that same period. Robinson missed last week with a foot injury, and if he is active, I'd be a little concerned about how effective he could be this week. Another running back I'm concerned about is Deandre Swift versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, temper your expectations. You're probably still putting him in your lineup, but temper those expectations. You can bet Swift is going to be involved in the pass game, and the Steelers have been giving up yards on the ground, 737, and they've been giving up a little bit in the passing game too, with 296 to opposing backs. But they have a bend but don't break philosophy and have only yielded 2 touchdowns this season, which is the main reason why they are 3rd in fantasy points against running backs, allowing only 18.29 fantasy points per game. Now, swinging it over to the wide receiver position, you know Cooper Kupp, he's in your lineup. Davante Adams is in your lineup. Tyreek Hill's probably going to get in your lineup, but I'm tempering those expectations when it comes to Mr. Tyreek Hill this week because he is facing the Raiders defense that has been pretty stingy against wide receivers so far this year. Now, the 3 I'm looking at starting here this week, Rashad Bateman versus Miami. He's going to be my must start each and every week until the man gets a little bit of respect. He saw a season high there, 66 snaps, 88% routes, and 8 targets last week, and is poised for a huge breakout as he faces a Dolphins team that is averaging the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers at 42.36 per contest. Yeah, Marquis Brown, he's going to go to Hollywood this week. You know, Rashad Bateman, he's going to have a big week. And you know what? It's not just the points. They're giving up yards. They're giving up the 2nd most yards to wideouts this year, 1,735 and 12 touchdowns. Now, another wide receiver I'm firing up, Mike Evans versus the Washington football team. This goes for Goddard. This goes for Antonia Brown, if healthy. The football team is allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing receivers at the tune of 43 per contest. The 6th most yards, 1,565, to go along with 11 touchdowns. Look for Evans to get back onto that 1,000-yard pace as he has slipped to 37th in the league in receiving yards with 544. This is going to be one of those get-right games for Mr. Evans. Tom Brady's going to be looking to get him right. Now, another guy looking to get back in the good graces of fantasy managers is CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. He gets to face off with the Atlanta Falcons here this week. Lamb should be a must start each and every week, but that hasn't been the case as of late. Lamb is the wide receiver 17 thus far in the season, but last week was not good. The Broncos limited him to 2.3 fantasy points. And in fact, Lamb has one game with more than 17 fantasy points on the year. Like Evans, this week is one of those get-right weeks for CeeDee Lamb against the Falcons, who are allowing 36 fantasy points per game to wide receivers and are near the top when it comes to touchdowns allowed with 11. Now, with everyone that you got to start, we got to give a little bit of a side note here. You got to feel good about A.J. Brown and Julio Jones against the Saints, who have allowed 52 fantasy points per game in the last two contests and 5 touchdowns. Same to be said about the Minnesota Vikings defense. Fire up Keenan Allen. Fire up Mike Williams. Feel confident about it. The Vikings have allowed 500 yards to receivers over the last 2 games and 51.75 fantasy points per game over those last 2. So feel good about that. Now, for every good play, there are some bad plays. A little temper those expectations. DeAndre Hopkins versus Carolina is one of those guys that I'm sitting this week. Hopkins still isn't quite there yet. And the Panthers defense has been, they've been okay when it comes to defending opposing wideouts this season, allowing 29.53 fantasy points per contest. Hopkins is no longer a must start, and that's not a bad thing for the Cardinals, as Kyler Murray's been spreading the ball around well, making the Cardinals a much better offense. Now, Hopkins is still averaging his 15.3 per contest, but after further aggravating that hamstring injury against the Packers a couple weeks ago and missing last week, I want to see where he's at before I put him back into my lineup. Now, another guy that I'm not putting in my lineup here anytime soon is going to be Courtland Sutton versus the Eagles. We have a 4-game sample here now with Sutton alongside with Judy. In those 4 contests, we have seen Sutton's production drop from 17 fantasy points per game to 5.5 fantasy points per game with Judy next to him. That is not good. And the Eagles are 4th in fantasy points against wideouts this year, allowing 29.32 per game, while allowing the 6th fewest receiving yards at 1,185. Sutton, you're back on the bench, dude. Now, the tight end position, don't get cute. Kelsey, great matchup against the Raiders. Waller, great matchup against the Chiefs. Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, you're firing them up. And if Gronk is back, he's back in your lineup too. Now, we've seen what Pat get my English here right. Pat Freiermuth versus Detroit. We saw what he did last week. Well, you know what? I've mentioned this was coming the last couple times in my waiver wire videos. Even last week, I said grab him the rest of the season because these pass catches for the Steelers, they're going to have a huge role going forward. Now, I did say not to start him against the Bears. That kind of backfired. He's got 2 touchdowns there, 43 yards, 5 receptions. And now the schedule, like I just said, is going to get better for Freiermuth. Detroit Lions, not a very good defense. You can start him with confidence. Another guy I'm starting this week, Logan Thomas, Washington football team versus Tampa Bay. I grabbed him a couple weeks ago specifically for this game. Well, not for the Bucs in particular, but for this return to the lineup. We could feel coming in week 10. It's not often you get an opportunity to grab a positional number 1 for your squad off the waiver wire, but he was dropped in a lot of leagues. Now it was time to go grab him, and now you get to plug him back in your lineup. And the Bucs are allowing the 8th most points to tight ends this year. Yeah, Logan Thomas, you're back in my lineup. And I know I said I want to see what you can do first before I put you in my lineup, but it's a tight end position. It's always been wait and see at the tight end position. It is that bad. Now, a guy who's not bad, Dan Arnold versus the Colts. I thought about putting Gesicki in here, also must start, but I wanted to show the man, Dan Arnold, some love here. Double-digit fantasy production in 3 of the last 4 games. And facing the Colts defense that has allowed over 16 per game to tight ends, Arnold's going to keep that streak rolling, and you should trust him. Now, 2 guys I'm not trusting here. It's going to be Dallas Goddard versus the Broncos. Look, the Broncos have a good defense and in particular good at defending opposing tight ends. So far this season, they are allowing the 3rd fewest points to tight ends and are averaging a modest 7.97 fantasy points per game against. And yet they have not yielded a touchdown either. So it's not looking good. The law of averages is not in the favor of one Mr. Goddard. Sit him. Now, another guy who's going to have a bit of an uphill battle here is Jared Cook versus Minnesota. Yes, good play last week. This week, not so good. The Vikings are the 5th stingiest defense towards the tight end position, allowing 8.73 fantasy points per game. And like the Broncos and the Saints, have yet to allow a touchdown this position to the big men with hands. Sit Jared Cook. That all said, You want these facts and stats? Make sure to head over to fantasypoints.com. Enter promo code 21Vipers10. Get 10% off that subscription. And right now, they've given you a bit about a half mid-season discount right now, so you can get even cheaper. Figure out what's going on. Trust me, you will not regret it. And make sure to tune in every Tuesday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast, where myself and Tara and Major, we sit back and we preview each matchup in the week, the starts and sits, the waivers, and we make some bold predictions. Till then, till next time, we'll catch you later. Take care.